This podcast does not provide medical nor legal advice. Please listen to the complete disclosure at the end of the recording.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Everyone Dies, the podcast where we talk about serious illness, dying, death, and bereavement. I'm Marianne Matzo, nurse practitioner, and I use my experience from working as a nurse for 44 years to help answer your questions about what happens at the end of life.
And I'm Charlie Navarrete, an actor in New York City, here to answer questions that you may have while listening to the podcast. We are both here because the more you plan for your death, because everyone dies, the better prepared you will be. When death comes a-knockin', you'll be rockin'.
This is what happens when we let Charlie ad-lib.
And I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Please relax and get yourself something to eat and drink, and thank you for spending the next hour with Charlie and me in our metaverse. In our metaverse, or is it a multiverse?
Yes. I have no idea, Marianne is.
As we continue our series about loving and caregiving for a partner with dementia. In the first half, Charlie talks to us about mummification. Now, he's really excited about this story, so let's be supportive. Our recipe of the week is for a 4-ingredient peanut butter cookie, which is so simple to make that you could eat the whole batch and just totally mummify yourself. Or you can make it for an unexpected funeral lunch with what you have, or you most likely have, in your cupboard. In the second half, I'm going to be talking about how to tell someone with a dementia diagnosis that someone close to them has died. And in our third half, Charlie has a Facebook post from a caregiver whose wife is in a memory care center. So before we started recording, Charlie was telling me that he went to a Broadway play and met somebody famous. Do you want to tell our listeners how you accosted an old man in the theater?
No, let them figure it out for themselves. How many old people are there in New York? There can't be that many. So the playwright, his name is Tom. Everyone says Tom Stoppard. Technically, his name is Tom Stoppard. He is
really. I always thought it was Stoppard.
It's only, well, yeah, I mean, everyone pretty much calls him Tom Stoppard. Stoppard because, hang on, don't tell me why. Originally from Czechoslovakia. I don't remember. But he mostly grew up in London. But, the accent is because of the original, wherever he's from, Czechoslovakia, I think. So anyways, he is considered, probably the best playwright in the world. And he's worked on a few films, one of them being Shakespeare in Love. So yes, so he wrote part of that, and he's just done a lot of script writing as well. But his claim to fame is the theater. He's just written these magnificent plays. His most recent is called Leopoldstadt. Basically, it traces actually his family going back to the late 1800s all the way through modern time, and everything there's family went through, including Stoppard is of Jewish descent. He just everything his family went through. I mean, they went from incredibly wealthy to everything being taken away from them, by the Nazis. And then the legacy of all that, like decades later. Just if you're ever in a neighborhood of New York, I really recommend you see it. It'll be around for a couple of more months.
So you accosted him in a theater.
So anyway, I went to see a play last night called Endgame. Another wonderful actor, Bill Irwin, was in that. But so anyway, getting ready to leave, and the aisle is small, and people are looking at this elderly gentleman, and I looked at him, and it's like, holy shit, it's Tom Stoppard. I just went up to him, and I I just started, babbling, like I am now, and he was he was very nice.
I'm just having so much trouble envisioning this, Charles.
Yeah. I just started, just rattling off all these different plays, and I was just so excited. And I grabbed Mr. Tapard's arm, and thank goodness he didn't call security. He thanked me for, as he said, my very kind words, and I don't know. He saw I wasn't too much of a maniac, and then he grabbed my arm, and we were just like, I don't know, just had a moment there with him. He had to be there, and if you don't know him, this doesn't make much sense. But yeah, as far as playwriting goes, he is one for the ages. So that's
what a great experience, huh?
Yeah, it really was. Yeah. So back to the show. What am I talking about?
Recipes and dead bodies.
Yes, and this week we have 2 recipes, not only those peanut butter cookies, but mummification. So grab pencil and paper, you will want to write this down. Recently, researchers found substances used by Egyptian morticians more than 2,600 years ago in the 7th and 6th century BC. That's before cocktails. 31 ceramic vessels were excavated from an embalming workshop near Pyramid, southwest of Cairo. The vessels had inscriptions labeling the substance and its usage, such as to put on his head, or bandage or embalm with it. Excavation leader Suzanne Beck of the University of Tübingen, Germany, stated that scientists have known the names of many of the embalming ingredients since ancient Egyptian writings were deciphered, but had no idea of the individual substances. Until now. A new gizmo called the New Gas Chromatography Mass Spectrometry revealed that what had been thought of as myrrh or frankincense was actually a blend of cedar oil, juniper cypress oil, and animal fats. Other substances identified were used to embalm certain parts of the body. For example, pistachio resin and castor oil were used only for the head. So while some of the substances were acquired regionally, the bulk of the substances used for embalming were not from Egypt itself, says archaeologist Philip Stockhammer. Many substances were imported from the Mediterranean region, but others came from tropical Africa or Southeast Asia. This suggests that thousands of years ago, BC, before cars, an already established international trading network stretched from Indonesia to India, through the Middle East, Mesopotamia, to Egypt, and to Africa. Archaeologist Dr. Indiana Jones, Dr. Stockhammer, added, Egyptian embalming required more and more of these kinds of resins and really instigated and intensified this exchange. Research will continue on the substances and their viability because modern-day pharmacology could benefit from these ancient mixtures' antiviral and antifungal properties. Mahmoud Bhagat of the National Research Center in Cairo observes, we spend billions of dollars to try to find alternate antibiotics. At the end of the day, you might come up with completely different applications that might have implications on other biomedical research. Like all good science, it answers some questions, but that opens up some new ones. So, please go to our webpage for both of those recipes and additional resources for the program. Many of you contact Everyone Dies to say thanks to Marianne and how her 40-plus years of knowledge have helped you. So we ask for your support in the form of a tax-deductible contribution so that we can continue to offer you quality programming. Thank you in advance for going to our website to make your donation, as well as following us on Facebook and Instagram. Visit us at www.everyonedies.org. That's every, the number one, dies.org. Marianne?
Thank you for that, Charlie. So when I need to embalm somebody, I know I need to smash up my pistachios or whatever.
Yes.
You know, I've had quite a few times where I've seen a post on Facebook where somebody's saying, I'm caring for my mother with dementia, and her sister has died, and I don't know what to do. Do I tell her that her sister died? Do I have her go to the funeral? What do I do? So, and I've answered people when I see those, and I thought, well, that's a good topic to do a podcast about. So, telling someone about the death of a family member is really pretty difficult for most people, but it's even more challenging when the person you have to tell has a dementia diagnosis. Your approach to giving this news will depend on the extent of the person's disease, where the person is at, and how much they still remember. Their expression of grief will be affected by a variety of factors: the extent of the dementia and the loss of awareness, how close a relationship the person had with the deceased, and how well the person can express their loss. The grieving process may be experienced by people with advanced dementia, but they may not have the brain function to make sense of their grief. So they know something's wrong, but they don't really have the way to express it. So grief can be expressed by a person with dementia as agitation or restlessness. They may have a sense that something's not right, or a generalized feeling of wrong being, or perhaps it's someone who is close to them is missing. The person may confuse the present loss with an earlier one. It's also possible that the person may not be able to retain the information that a loved one has died. So on first thought, you may try to protect the person with dementia and not confuse them by discussing death. However, it's important to remember that the person with dementia is an adult and is still the person that he or she always was, and to respect that they can still feel a lot of those same emotions. She just might not be able to express them the way she used to. Also, not sharing the news can confuse them even more and make it harder for her to cope, especially if the person who died had visited regularly. It's widely believed that protecting a person with dementia from the truth can cause confusion because the truth will not match the reality that is around them. If at all possible, tell the person that someone close to them has died. This is especially important for the person with dementia who's had regular contact with the person who has died, either as a carer, a friend, a spouse, a sibling. Now, this might not be easy, especially if you are also upset, but it's much better to tell the person than to try to pretend that everything is all right, as they may pick up on your sadness and not really understand why they too are feeling sad. There isn't one approach that works for all people with dementia, but consider some of these recommendations for sharing the news of death with someone who has dementia. First, find a time of day when the person's at their best and rested. You don't want to, if after lunch they're cranky and tired, that's not going to be the best time to give them this news. So know the person that you're talking to. If first thing in the morning, as they're laying in bed before they get up and washed or whatever, if that's when they're kind of at their best, that's when you want to tell them. Everyone's different, so know who it is you're talking to. It's best if one person is delegated to break the news. If you bring in a whole family group, it can be really overwhelming for people. You might be seeing or have seen on the news with Bruce Willis and his dementia and his family asking reporters to not shout at him, not run at him, it's just too much for people's brains to manage. And it's true in this case too. Just keep it one person. You want to find a quiet, comfortable space, and you want to stay calm. You can use body language to express your sadness. Cuddle them, hold their hand. My experience, most people with dementia like if you hold their hand or hold their arm. So that physical closeness is an important part of it. You want to keep your sentences short. Don't give too much information at once. So if somebody's been killed in a car accident, you don't really need to go into all of that. what they need to know is that they had an accident and they died. And keep it simple. Keep it simple. You want to use clear sentences like, your husband has died. This improves the chances that they're going to understand what they're being told. Avoid using euphemisms such as passed away or at peace now, because I don't even understand what those things mean. Somebody with dementia is not going to really understand what that means.
Yeah.
Just be clear. They died. After you give the information, it's important to watch the reaction. What did they say? Did their facial expression change? What did they do? And so what you're doing here is what you want to do is respond to their emotions to help them feel supported and feel comfortable. You may simply acknowledge their feeling by saying, this must make you feel really sad. Part of what happens with dementia is that they're not able to express what they're feeling. So they might act it out in some way or, hit themselves or try to hit you. What you want to say is kind of interpret it for them, by saying, this must make you feel sad. Your conversations may shift into reminiscing about the deceased and the times together, which could be really comforting for them. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end here because likely the person with dementia is not going to remember what they've been told. So, let's say it's Martha, who's living with dementia, and her husband, John, has died. Martha's still going to continue to ask for John. She's going to want to know where he is and when he's coming back. So a gentle reminder may work for some people. For others, being reminded that the person has died is greatly upsetting. It can be as if they're hearing the news for the very first time, and each reminder having the same upsetting effect. This is also really hard to cope with, especially if you have to contend with your own grief and you may feel frustrated, angry, and lonely. If this is the case, try to give yourself some space. Then try a different approach. Now, in the old days, I think like early 80s, I can remember that we practiced what was called reality orientation until we learned that we were torturing people with the truth. I can remember one man that we were caring for. I worked in the state mental hospital in Massachusetts, and he would come up, and this was, back in the day, Charlie, when people with dementia were put in the state mental hospital.
Right.
That's what happened to them. And this guy would come in and he'd say, where's my wife? I'm looking for my wife. I can't find my wife. And we would say, well, she died. And he would go, no. And he'd sob. And, we said, why do we keep telling him that? Like, what is the point of that? So what we started doing was a different approach, which I'll tell you about.
Mm-hmm.
So people who can't remember, that a loved one has died, doesn't help them. And it doesn't help the person who's telling them that this person has died because, like I said, they're hearing that news for the first time. So instead, what we started to do was tuning into the emotion that's being expressed beneath the words and respond to that emotion. If you're giving the message that you understand how they feel, this can override the need to have the questions answered. So the person might be expressing a genuine longing for the person who died, bewilderment as to why the person isn't nearby, fear, distress, suspicion, anger, concern. When you identify the emotion, it makes it easier to then know what to say. You can say things like, you sound as though you're really missing her. Tell me what she was like or what you miss about her. Or, you sound really frightened, lost, angry, fill in the blank. Let me help you with that. There also may be something practical that you could do. If Martha is saying, John won't help me, then ask, well, what would John do for you if he was here? This could involve, for example, giving the person a hug or finding something they're looking for. This may meet their immediate need and reduce their distress. Sharing your own loss can also help. You can say, well, I miss him too. Use the past tense when speaking because this will help orient the person. For example, we used to love John's chocolate cake, didn't we, Martha? Do you think we could make one as good? Be responsible to the moment, paying attention to the mood of the person and responding appropriately. If Martha seems unaware of change and is not distressed, don't try to force reality on her. You don't have to keep saying, good morning, Martha. Don't forget, John's dead. That's not what you're there to do. If Martha seems sad or angry or there's any other unexpected change in behavior, provide support for these emotions. Be prepared to revisit the experience or to never discuss it again, depending on Martha's response. Accept that Martha may want to talk about John frequently or infrequently, and that she may have far more understanding of the situation than what you might think. Who knows there's a whole big brain in there, and there might be a part of it that kind of gets it. But they can't get it out to let you know that they do understand it. Consider using reminiscence, which is, talking about John. Having a favorite piece of music or photographs can help the person work through their grief. If regularly responding to the emotion and reminiscence really isn't working, then, as a last resort, try distraction, bearing in mind that this will not help with the grief process, but may alleviate the stress of the moment. Look for any patterns as to when Martha is asking about John. Is it always in the early evening or always in the morning? Is it related to a particular routine that she and John always had? If you can spot the pattern, then having the distraction in place and fulfilling a routine before the questions start could really help. My general suggestion is to just answer the questions that she asks. If Martha doesn't remember that John has died, you don't need to keep upsetting her with this news. If she says, where's John? You can ask, well, what should we make him for lunch? Because once you start making a sandwich or making whatever, they're going to forget about, what it was that was beginning to upset them in the first place. Or you can say, let's look outside and see what we see. In other words, don't lie, but don't dwell about where John is and work to distract Martha. Respond to the emotion or the intent of her questions. I would have, when I was in the memory care with my students, I had this one lady who every day at lunchtime would start to get agitated. And she'd come up and she'd grab onto you and she just, would put her coat on. She'd say, I have to go. And I said to her, where is it you need to go? And she said, I have to go make my kids lunch. Mm. And I put my arm through her arm and I said, we just started walking. And I said, well, what are you going to make for lunch today? And then we would talk about lunches and this and that. And it's, how about let's go in the kitchen? Well, let's make crackers or have some graham crackers and peanut butter. And we'd make graham crackers and peanut butter. And, it could be that she was hungry at that point and she knew it was time for lunch. And in her head, the kids needed lunch, Mm-hmm. So we don't have to actually understand what the thread of thought is, but respond to what she's saying. I have to go make lunch. Well, let's go this way. Let's decide what we're going to make and just help her through it. Lastly, you want to be consistent. A consistent approach is essential when supporting someone with dementia, so there must be good communication between all family members and professionals about what techniques are being used to manage the bereavement and the questions. Everyone involved must use the same techniques to avoid further confusion and upset the person. And in the written care plans, this should be clearly written out. The key to helping Martha cope with John's death is to be patient and responsive, and that it's going to take time. Remaining present in the situation will help responses be authentic and supportive. Take time to address your own feelings, too. Don't hesitate to ask for help from others in dealing with your own grief or the person with dementia's grief. Any thoughts or questions about that, Charlie?
It's interesting you're discussing this now. A few days ago, a friend of mine told me that they're still doing tests, but she probably has lung cancer. And her mother has dementia, and it's worsening. And if there's nothing they can do for my friend, she was wondering whether to say anything to her mother. Her father has died. She has a brother. But what she's thinking is if her, as her mother's dementia continues, and then maybe just not saying anything. I mean, it'll depend on the timing. And then, to your point, that her brother can take, she and her brother already discussed it, that, they, and actually I'll tell her just what you said, because they're trying to figure out what they would say to her without saying, oh yeah, my friend's name is Mika, that, mom, Mika died. So yeah, I know it's just strange that you're talking about this now. I just had this conversation a couple of days ago.
I wouldn't say anything until she had a diagnosis.
Oh no, of course not.
A treatment
she wouldn't
plan
say
or
no.
whatever is going on.
Yeah.
But even if she's hospitalized, like if it is terminal and she's dying in the hospital, I would seriously consider letting mom, taking mom to the hospital and saying, as the daughter, I'm really sick and I love you, and do the work that we always say that needs to occur. I love you. I'm sorry if I ever upset you. I forgive you.
Yeah.
I'll miss you, and goodbye. And even if her mom doesn't remember that in the moment.
Oh, in that moment.
They have that.
Yeah.
They have that. And your friend can go to her death knowing that, she said goodbye to her mom. And who knows, sometimes people, can have that moment of clarity. I mean, I wouldn't probably take her every day, but I would take her once and see how it went.
Yeah.
Give her the chance.
Well, thank you. I'll pass that on. Sucks. But everyone dies. So with that, as Marianne mentioned, I'm going to read a part of a journal entry from a man whose wife of 50 years now lives in a memory care center. I've grown to love the ritual of tucking my wife in bed for the night. I spend the afternoon with her. I then eat dinner with her in the cafe. I feed her. We retreat to her memory care apartment, change briefs and pajamas if necessary, brush her teeth, and take her night medications. She gets in bed and I lotion her legs and feet. She loves the attention. We then watch a few minutes of her favorite cartoon, Clifford, the big red dog, and she becomes drowsy. I turn off the television around 6 and pick up a borrowed hymnal. I sing 6 or 7 hymns that I know she loves. She watches me intensely. The only song that she tries to sing along with is Jesus Loves Me. Then we get down to business. I turn off most of the lights. We say our prayers, and I begin to softly sing. You are my sunshine, over and over and over as I rub her legs and feet. She drifts off. I start moving toward the door but continue to softly sing until I am outside her room. I tell all of the other residents, who are watching TV in the common living room, good night, and I thank the aides and the nurses for all they do. I exit memory care to the assisted living wing and say goodbye to several new acquaintances as I walk through the facility. I touch many of them on the arm, the head, or the back. They miss and crave human touch, and it makes my lonely exit more enjoyable. You would think by now I would be tired of singing You Are My Sunshine, but I sing it several more times as I cross the parking lot. I drive to the back of the facility to my wife's window. Her blinds and curtains are shut, and she has no idea that I am just outside the window in my car, sometimes shedding a tear and sometimes singing and always saying a final prayer of protection for my girlfriend. I put the car in drive and start singing again. Sometimes I sing all the way to my home, about a 10 to 12-minute drive. I do not enjoy coming into a dark home that is quiet, so very quiet. I tell my friend Alexa to turn on the lights and play some of my favorite music. I read, I write in my journal, such as this one, and occasionally I watch some TV. Eventually, I get in my empty bed and tell Alexa good night. She knows to turn off the lights and play ocean sounds through her speaker. Another day ends.
Isn't it
It
incredible?
really is, yeah. Yes. Hmm. So, please stay tuned for the continuing saga of Everyone Dies, and thank you for listening. Sand through an hourglass is not the same as an hourglass through sand. This is Charlie Navarrete, and from author Douglas Adams, I'm spending a year dead for tax reasons.
And I'm Marianne Matzo, and we'll see you next week. Remember, you are someone's sunshine, and every day is a gift.
This podcast does not provide medical advice. All discussion on this podcast, such as treatments, dosages, outcomes, charts, patient profiles, advice, messages, and any other discussion are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Always seek the advice of your primary care practitioner or other qualified health providers with any questions that you may have regarding your health. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard from this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Everyone Dies does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, practitioners, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned in this podcast. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast by persons appearing on this podcast at the invitation of Everyone Dies or by other members is solely at your own risk.